What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Boogie2988 coming at your live once again through the power of the internet. And as more and more games come out as a live service, we're seeing more and more games coming out in an unfinished state. And these games tend to be ridiculed by both the people reviewing them as well as the users who are supposed to be the intended customers, as they probably should be. Take a game like Anthem, which released in a very unfinished state. Is it possible that they will be able to take that game and turn it around and make it a good game? Is that possible? Well, let's take a look at some games that have done that in the past. First up on this list is the game that inspired this list, and that is No Man's Sky. And when this game launched, it was quite the disaster, but fortunately the folks over at Hello Games managed to clear it up fairly well. And when we go back now and look at this 2015 Game Awards demo, obviously this was not the game that was delivered upon release, or nothing even remotely close to it. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, now in 2019, what does this game look like? Well, we can definitely say that the game has released a ridiculous number of patches, and these patches did bring a lot of the really cool promised features that we were hoping for in the game, including multiplayer and now eventually a VR update. This is definitely not the game that it was when it was released. Now on the screen right now, I'm showing you Quill18 playing this game as it stands right now. This is 2019 gameplay. And even though this does look better, even though it does look more interesting, it certainly is nowhere near as good as what seemed to be promised. So I don't think they've ever delivered on what they promised, even though it's getting closer and closer to that every day, and is definitely a much better game than was launched, but it still really didn't fulfill the prophecy that they laid out. Regardless of whether or not they ever made it the game that they promised, we can take a look at Steam charts and see how many people are playing this game as of today. And this game is certainly not any more successful for all the work and time they have put into it. With only 4,467 people playing it as of 20 minutes ago, the 24-hour peak of only 5,000 people playing it, but at the all-time peak of 212,000 people playing it upon launch, you got a pretty good feeling here that this game is definitely not successful. And this, I think, is probably not just the first really good example, but the best example of a game that was launched as a games as a service. Not your World of Warcraft or your EverQuest as your MMO, but the modern-day version of it. This is a game that overpromised on its features, then under-delivered upon release, with the promise that later they would add those features and add those things, and now that they have added a lot of that stuff, most people have completely lost interest. People who paid for that game on the day of launch never got to play the game that they were thinking they were buying. Then there's the case of Sea of Thieves, which definitely overpromised and under-delivered. But this game has done a much better job of delivering what it promised, and even though it's still a bit of a threadbare game, it's managed to win a lot of notable players back to the game. This game definitely has a following now. People doing role-playing sessions in the game, people playing the game for the actual game mechanics that are there. I mean, overall, this game looks and plays very, very close to what they were promising. And this game was definitely the 2018 version of No Man's Sky, getting horribly critically panned, as it should have been, because it was a very threadbare game upon release. And while they don't do as good of a job as showing you every patch that they've ever done here on the Sea of Thieves website, they definitely show you the most recent patch, and even this most recent patch has quite a big update, including combat balances, and new stuff to do, and new ships, and new items, and new stuff to buy, but more importantly, it adds a lot of the content we were hoping would be there to the game. So Sea of Thieves is probably successful. I think you can use it as a successful example of a game that has recovered. The problem is, I can't imagine the recovery success would be near as good as if that game had just been released in a finished state. But I think of all the games that could appear on this list, Final Fantasy XIV is probably the most interesting one, because when this game launched, it launched in such a terrible, awful state that players rioted and boycotted it, causing them to shut the game down and start over from scratch. Now, I do want to take a moment here to say that Final Fantasy XIV is kind of cheating when I put it on this list, because it is more of a traditional games as a service, your World of Warcraft, EverQuest style MMORPG. It's not really a No Man's Sky or a Sea of Thieves or an Anthem, but it's what those games are trying to be, just on consoles pretty much. But the 2010 version of Final Fantasy XIV had to be shut down and replaced in 2013 with the Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn. And this was a true reboot. It's as if they just took Anthem completely off the market, stopped selling it for a while, and then started selling it again when the game was finally finished, which might be the best example of how this should be done. The original launch of Final Fantasy XIV received a 49 Metacritic score with a 3.9 user score. Compare that to A Realm Reborn, released 3 years later, with a Metacritic score of 86 and a user score of 7.3. This seems to be the best example of games as a service getting it right after they got it so wrong. And this is even more of a cheat here, and I'm going to admit that, because MMORPGs frequently got expansions, and this kind of counts as an expansion for the original game, except, it just kind of replaced all of the original content as well. Not every one of these games is going to have the luxury of being able to shut down everything, refund everybody's money, and then just fix the game and make it again later. And not everybody's going to have the luxury of doing that, but boy, I sure wish they did, because it definitely seems to have worked. Final Fantasy XIV is about to release its third expansion, and if you look at this player census, it looks like it has a tremendously large population on its servers still. And they just had a fan fest, and that fan fest had record attendance, so this game is doing exceptionally well. And the decision to shut this game down originally probably cost them tens of millions of dollars. I mean, a tremendous amount of money. But it sounds like the choice to shut it down, rebuild the game, start over from scratch, and release a much better, much more complete game seems to have made them billions with a B. So, seems like a smart decision to me.
And I thought I would be playing Diablo 3, you'd be playing Diablo 3, but nobody's fucking playing Diablo 3! Because you got the servers down, the servers are down! And every time I try to log in, all I get is fucking error 37. Error 37. I keep trying to log in and I get error 37.
We cannot complete this list without talking about one of the most disastrous game launches of all time that resulted in what is honestly one of my favorite games of the last 10 years, and that is Diablo 3. But boy, when this game started, it was a mess. Now, what's interesting about the case of Diablo 3 is that the content was always there. This game cannot really be compared with Anthem because the core gameplay and the core concepts and everything else was there. And because of it, it got a very high Metacritic score, but a very low user score. In this particular case, even though the game itself was very, very good, the servers were very, very bad. And then on top of that, the game's itemization was bad. The storyline, the combat, the world design, the audio, everything else was fantastic. But some of the gameplay decisions they made it a nightmare of a game to play. The game was designed for you to pick up loot that you couldn't use and that you could sell or trade to other people. And this has always been a bit of a Diablo staple. However, they decided to also monetize it, allowing you to sell these items on an auction house also for real cash, real money, and that was the biggest design decision that really marred this game at launch besides its server issues. Now, the good news for Diablo 3, it was a big fix, but it wasn't that difficult to do because all of the content was already there. All they needed to do was get rid of the real money auction house, get rid of the auction house in general, and allow you to farm for the items that you wanted just by increasing the loot table. So it took a little while to do it, but 3 to 6 months after the game's release, the game was a little bit better. And after they finally added an expansion, the game became fantastic. Now here in 2019, the PC version of this game is still available. There's all kinds of things to do, including the rifts and the other great stuff. Seasonal content, the game is frequently updated, frequently patched with brand new stuff to do, brand new content, and brand new reasons to do it. And even the Nintendo Switch version has a Ganondorf skin for the Barbarian. So this game it's really good. You should play it if you haven't. You really should. So there we have it. We have 4 examples of games that were bad at launch that became a little bit better. No Man's Sky probably being the least successful, Diablo 3 being the most successful, and Final Fantasy XIV making the most money. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is this. You cannot count on your game being able to rebound. It doesn't matter how good your roadmap is. And for every No Man's Sky, for every Final Fantasy XIV, there's at least one Fallout 76. And we still don't know whether or not Fallout 76 or Anthem or any of these other games will be able to recover. It's a bad business strategy, and I don't see why these companies insist on releasing these games unfinished, unpolished, with a roadmap to the future, knowing that it's entirely possible they'll fail, and hoping they won't. The one thing you can say about most of the games on this list is it probably wasn't released intentionally broken, intentionally bad, intentionally unfinished, with a roadmap for success on the day they're released. These are games that just utterly failed and decided to make good anyway. These days, we're seeing games like Anthem, like Fallout 76, like Battlefield 5, and so many other live service games being released in a purposely incompleted state, with a roadmap promising you content later down the road. Pay for it now, get the content later. The point of this list is not to encourage or to celebrate this kind of behavior, it's to actually discourage it and show you some examples of games that failed when they launched and were able to recover because they needed to recover, not because they planned to. I personally suspect that Fallout 76 will never reach the notoriety that No Man's Sky did, and that was probably the worst performing game on this list. As for other things like Anthem or Battlefield 5 or Star Wars Battlefront 2, these other games that failed on launch, I'm sure they'll get some following, but maybe not enough to even break even. And I myself, I'm rooting for Anthem. I'm rooting for Fallout 76. I love the folks at Bethesda. I love the Fallout property. I love what I have played of Anthem, and I want that game to be very good. And I love the folks at BioWare. I don't want to see them get canned by EA by any stretch of the imagination. I want to prevent that from happening. But maybe this list can prove as an example of games that were the exceptions and not the rules. Maybe I'll make a companion piece with this sometime that shows all of the games that failed and stayed failed. And I hope that by the time I make that, Anthem and Fallout 76 won't have to be on that list. Now, again, this is one man's opinion. I could be wrong, and if I am wrong, I know you're going to let me know in the comments section below. While you're down there, hit that subscribe button if you like this type of content. Let me know what you thought about this video. It's a little different from the gaming news, and it was a little more positive than average, so I hope you will enjoy the positivity, celebrating some good games that you might want to go back and play now that they're finally done, especially if you paid for them originally. But until then, guys, thanks for watching. I love you very much, and I'll speak with you again